recording. Apologies if the internet quality which is just is terrible. Look at the video that with quality from the if any and look at that. Okay, if this of the screen is more and what Oxfam is doing.
Hi everybody, can people hear me? That doesn't sound very good actually, does it? Just mute your microphone, James, so I can see. Is that better? Can people hear me now? Can you hear? So, my name is Richard Stanforth. I'm the Regional Policy Advisor in Oxfam.
What Oxfam?
And I cover the Middle East. I started Oxfam about in 1990, and I was a shop volunteer in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And despite the very posh dress today, I was sort of in charge of men's clothing in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And then some of you might know, I was the Midlands campaigner for Oxfam for 6 years up until from 2001 until 5 years till 2005. So I'm a very passionate campaigner, and I'm very passionate about the work that you're all doing to support Oxfam as volunteers to help our campaigns. And people remember 3 things from presentations, and the one thing I want you to remember today is that to write a letter to the UK government, to your MP, asking them to suspend arms sales. So that's the clear ask from this telecom today. I've got about another 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it for some questions as well. So I was asked to talk a bit about the conflict in Yemen, and then I'm going to go and talk about a little bit about what Oxfam's doing in Yemen, a bit of what's going on in the country. Am I on mute?
You are then.
Mute microphone. No, I'm not. And then I was also going to talk about what we're doing, what happened in the war, and finally talk about arms sales. And then James is going to come in, I think, aren't you, and talk about basically issues around what you can do as campaigners and working with activist groups and things across the UK. So I first went to Yemen in 2006, and I've been following it really closely since 2009. I've made 6 or 7 visits, but I never actually went during the current war. I wasn't able to get into Yemen. There's been severe visa restrictions. Actually, my best friend that I work with in Oxfam, he's Yemeni, and he was a campaigner, a local campaigner in the UK, and he went back to Yemen to work with Oxfam in 2014 on governance projects. We had a lot of projects, like projects, we had education projects in the past. We had projects particularly around early marriage, lots and lots of girls. It's the worst gender indicators in the world. lots and lots of girls were married off really young. So we campaigned supporting Yemeni activists, basically, to get a law on early marriage. Anyway, he basically went back to Yemen, and then in March 2015, 26th of March, we saw basically Saudi begin bombing of the country. But what really led to that situation was, I think, an economic crisis that Yemen's been facing for nearly 10 years. We had a situation where the country is basically running out of oil and it's running out of water. Its main economy was built around oil, and it only had few oil resources left, and was going to become a net importer of oil in 2015. And the local people in Yemen, most of the population received less and less resources from the government, from government service providers, because government was effectively running out of money. It was taking less and less oil out of the ground. As a consequence, it paid less and less. There was less and less economy going. They were struggling to get electricity, to get enough oil to pump water out the ground. And effectively, people rebelled. And in 2011, women actually led a revolution in the country, unexpectedly. Yemen is the poorest country, 26 million people. It's extremely poor, actually. And they led this revolution. But what the international community did in response to that was basically just move the chairs around. So the previous president, who was effectively a dictator, who'd been in place for 30 years, President Saleh, he was replaced by the international community. They basically placed him in power. One of the diplomats said, "I'm placing this guy called President Hadi in power," and they placed him in power. And then President Hadi ignored the needs of the population, failed to bring water, failed to bring services to people, failed to increase the economic situation and help them. And governments around the world also ignored Yemen's population. And as a result of that, by 2015, the fuel prices were rising massively. There was the country had no oil left, really. The economy was going bankrupt. The central bank was going bankrupt. And a northern group called the Houthis, who had always been marginalised, they basically started moving further militarily. They were an armed group, and they moved further and further south, and they took control of the capital. And the international community responded to that, and they actually went all the way down to the very bottom of Yemen, down to Aden. I'm sorry I've not got the maps because of problems we faced, but they moved all the way down to the very bottom of Yemen, Aden, because Yemen's you might remember there was actually a British protectorate. It's a former British colony, South Yemen, and tried to take Aden. And the international community responded to the fact that they took over the country by basically bombing Yemen, particularly a coalition led by Saudi Arabia. And Britain and America, France particularly, other states, many European states have got behind it, Canada as well, started providing weapons to Yemen. And the consequence of that is that my best friend that was in Yemen, that went back to Yemen in 2014, and all my staff that I know really, really well, they were being bombed on a nightly basis, night after night in the capital of Yemen and some of the key cities. There's been thousands and thousands of attacks. He fled from the capital to the port cities to try and get on a boat to escape. He's actually British. He had a Yemeni wife now. He fled to this port city called Hodeida, and he was in a hotel first night, and a bomb dropped, and it hit the building next door. And obviously his wife, he was in absolute shock. But they stayed in the same place because they thought the bomb won't hit twice in the same place. The next night, the bomb hit again, exactly the same place. And he was really struggling to actually get out of the country. All the sea operations had stopped, the airport closed. A lot of my other colleagues were trying to find the safest place to actually live, and that's gone on in the middle of the night, and it's been a real panic. But to their credit, they've carried on responding, and they've now helped over 1 million people, despite the fact that they themselves have lost loved ones. And I have to say, it's not just been the attacks from the air, which frankly have caused about 2/3, 60% of all civilian casualties, and 2/3 of damage to public buildings. But also, there's been attacks by the Houthis, sniper fire. There's been shelling. They've been sieging in key towns like Taiz. So it's not just one-sided. And you've got Al Qaeda, you've got ISIS. There's a whole range of different groups that have taken power in this situation, used the crisis and used the war basically to take power, and to try and make life difficult for Yemen and Yemenis. And Oxfam responded to the situation, pressing for a ceasefire. And the British government at first refused to call for a ceasefire. And we lobbied Keith Vaz to press Tobias Ellwood and the minister at the time, Philip Hammond, to come out and call for a ceasefire. And initially, for the first few months, they actually refused. And they carried on sending arms sales, and arms sales went from over $1 billion to, I mean, the total now since the war started is over $3.3 billion worth of arms sales in the last 2 years, from March 2015. And we've been campaigning as Oxfam, as you know, basically to get the UK government to stop the arms sales. And we went and we tried to go meet with government officials. We've tried to meet Mark Goldring, our chief executive, has met ministers. We've pressed them, but effectively we've not been listened to. There's expressions of concern, but the government has said it's fine. We're carrying on. This is better for Yemen. Literally, they've said that in the select committee, in a lot of parliamentary hearings. They've pressed basically that we must continue selling because we've got this relationship with Saudi Arabia, and this is the best thing to do. And we've been highlighting the consequences of the war, the consequences on ordinary people. There's now over 10,000 people have been killed, and that's a very conservative estimate. The UN have actually stopped counting because they can't count anymore. I mean, some people think it's tens and tens of thousands of people have been killed. At least 40,000 people have been injured. Many civilians, over 1,000 children, and there's been public buildings, there's been ports. Our Oxfam's own warehouse was bombed. And we've installed water pumps, solar-powered water pumps in one area. 100 of these large solar panels were bombed by Saudis. We saw a whole range of things: bridges, houses, schools, hospitals. That's basically what we've been seeing. And in response to all this evidence, all this information, the UN wrote about it, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch went. And in response to all this, the government basically has turned around and said, well, it's not strong enough evidence that there's been violations of international humanitarian law, the laws of war, basically war crimes. We've got no proof. And they rejected everything. And then finally, Saudi Arabia started admitting things. They started admitting that there have been violations. And the UK government said, oh, that's great. Saudi Arabia has admitted these violations now. It doesn't matter that they've admitted the violations. It's still okay to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia to use in Yemen, because they're actually investigating what they're doing and they're admitting stuff. And actually, they've got a process in place. You know, whether or not they're committing war crimes or not, it seems to the government to be irrelevant, which is really quite shocking. And then to finish everything, next week on the 7th to the 9th of February, I've got the right date, the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, not Oxfam, are taking the UK government to court in a High Court review. They've led this High Court review of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and it's a judicial review, and we're hopeful that it will lead to the government being forced to suspend arms sales, which we feel will put pressure on Saudi Arabia to actually bring an end to the war. So that's the key thing. Shall I hand over to James now, and then you can talk about basically
what we're asking you to do.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I've discovered that it might be actually my computer that's as much as the problem as the internet connection. So we're going on this one. So hopefully you can still see us and hear us. So yes. So as Richard said, just outlining the situation, how we got to where we are, and and where we are now. The key thing that we're trying to do is try and apply as much pressure as possible on the government through all the avenues and channels that we have to suspend arms sales. In light of the fact that, from our point of view, it's the Arms Trade Treaty and the what's called consolidated criteria have clearly been breached, and that the government needs to, the Foreign Office in particular, needs to follow the treaties and follow the laws that it's passed and suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, one of the best ways we can do this is through you guys as campaigners to write to your MPs and tell them that this is an issue that's important to you, this is an issue that you care about, and that you want them to act, and you want them to specifically write to the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, and call on him to use his power as Foreign Secretary to suspend arms sales immediately, which is within his gift. And second of all, asking the MP, wherever you are, whichever MP you have, anywhere in the country, they might be able to, might not be able to sign a public petition, a public statement that Oxfam's drafted, which is basically outlining what we said here, the reasons why that we think that the arms sales should be suspended. Now, in terms of writing a letter, there are some people watching this who are constituency campaigners who have probably heard this from either myself and Diane a number of times, and there are some people who might be just normal campaigners or shop volunteers or campaigners elsewhere who haven't. So anyway, I'll whistle through them, but there's just a few key messages here I wanted to leave you guys with as to how to write a letter. And how to write the best letter, the most influential letter that has the most impact with your Member of Parliament. So the first thing, and I'll include a link to all these in the video, so even if you can't hear me, you'll be able to find all these. So the first thing is always include your name and the address, and your address, including your postal code, so the MP knows that you're a constituent. They can only, by convention, answer any correspondence that are from people in their constituency. With the best will of the world, even the nicest MP won't respond to you if you're not within the bounds of their constituency. So that's key point number one. Make it visible, keep it at the top of the letter, begin with as your constituent living in X or Y. Second, keep it short. The shorter the letter, in a way, the better. So you condense your argument into ideally 1 page of A4, so that all you need to do is get the key points across and the key asks that you want. So yeah, keeping it as short as possible. Starting on a positive note is the next one, and this is where it begins to become important to do some research into who your MP is and what they've done in the past. Have a look at their record in Parliament. Have they mentioned Yemen? Have they mentioned this before? Are they already supportive? Just finding out if are they interested in international development? Are there any positive things either they've done or their party has done that you can sort of refer to? For example, I see that you spoke in a debate on Yemen a couple of months ago, speaking about the humanitarian situation. I'm writing to you now about the arms trade, something like that. If there isn't anything, or if there's anything, or if you can't find anything, it doesn't matter, but it can be a nice touch to add in. Making it personal. So one of the things we thought about doing for this campaign and for this action, which you'll be able to find on the website, is the idea of writing it handwritten, which takes a little bit more time, and it's a little slower to reach the MP if you're putting it in the post. But it's an incredibly personal touch, which in this day and age of 38-degree style e-petitions, e-letters going to MPs, emails going to MPs, they're all bland, they're all the same, they're all generic, they're very easy to ignore, or very easy to sort of discount and save in a folder. Physical letters that include handwritten sometimes, provided it's legible, we might not be completely legible, but they give a power and a weight which is completely missing nowadays in correspondence between MPs and their constituents, as we've all moved to email, and they're so unusual that it gives it, we hope in some ways, an extra weight. So it is a little extra to ask for you to take the time to write this out, maybe draft it online on a Word or something, and then type it out, write it out yourself, handwritten. But we think it gives extra weight. If you haven't got the time, it doesn't matter. You can either type it and post it or email it. It doesn't make that much difference. But we just think in terms of getting the extra influence, it's great. If you already know the MP, maybe begin by mentioning that. Have you met them before? When did you meet them? Just nodding to that, as well as, as we said about keeping it positive for the things they've done. Get straight to the point. So it's point number 6. So in the opening paragraph, make it clear what you want them to do. So setting out who you are, where you're from, and saying there, right then in the opening paragraph, I want you to write to the Foreign Secretary, to call him, then you go into the details in the rest of the letter. Number 7 is be clear about what the letter, or be clear in the letter about the asks. So yeah, same thing. You can talk in a little bit more detail, and you can bring in points that Rich has mentioned that you can find online later. But right there at the beginning, you could almost put it in bold if you wanted to, or in underline it if you were handwriting it or something. Just make it really clear what you want them to do, so you can hold the MP to account. So they know what you want them to do on their behalf. They might be able to do it, but at least they know. And yeah, so it's crystal clear. Yeah, number 8, writing clear, simple language, making each of your points as succinctly as possible. Avoid jargon. Just yeah, I mean, international development and international issues could tend to have, as you'll know, just a huge number of acronyms, but maybe just try and keep it as simple as possible, because after all, it's your personal argument as to why you think, why you want your MP and the government to act this way. Number 9, you may want to include relevant background briefings alongside your letter. So if you were posting it, and again, if you had the time and resources, you could print off one of our briefings that we'll have sent you as campaigners, or that are available on the website, or you could, you know, attach anything else you think might be relevant. A letter, you could include pictures. Yeah, if you find anything really. Sometimes there are extra little things that can help. Obviously, a lot easier if you're emailing, including you can include hyperlinks maybe to videos. If your MP is, for example, a Conservative MP, it might be helpful that one of the 2 videos that are included on the Facebook event for this are from the Conservative Shadow International, or former Secretary of State for International Development, Andrew Mitchell, who recently went on a trip to Yemen, and his videos is a much better presenter than either myself or Richard, I think. So yes, in terms of putting forward a powerful argument. But those 2 videos are fascinating in sort of his lessons of what he saw in Yemen. And finally, check for accuracy, especially spellings of the MP's name, their title. Some MPs have odd titles, Dame, the Right Honourable, Honourable. Sometimes it just helps to get those things right and gets you off on the right foot. But remember, and this is the most important thing that I'll finish on before we wrap up and see if this worked or not. Remember that you don't have to be a political expert. It doesn't matter if you don't know some specific detail, or if you don't know the right specific UN agency or something. The important thing is that it's personal to you. This is an action, this is a lobbying that you're doing to your MP for something that you care about. And that's one of the reasons why I think handwriting it or writing it in your own words makes so much more difference. Makes the world, really, in terms of giving it impact. You can have the best argued statistics in the most well-crafted, we could write the most well-crafted email, including all of the intricacies of the legal argument, but it won't have as much weight as your own words in your own voice with your member of parliament, which is one of the best things that you can do as constituency campaigners, as constituents generally with your MPs, putting forward your argument as their constituent to them on something you would like them to do in Parliament. Anywho, so yes, so thank you for watching. I hope this has worked. I hope most of it's been visible and audible. I'd like to thank Richard for coming in a suit. Thank you very much, Richard.
It's okay, thank you.
And anywho, thank you very much and have a good evening.